So I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:32. Our first item of business is visitors and employees to be heard. Seeing none, except for Ben, I suppose. Oh, is there anything you'd like to contribute to that agenda item?
I'm all set, thank you.
Okay. We move on to our third agenda item, the annual reorganization of the CCSU board. So a quick preface: each year after all the boards have turned over and reorganized, the CCSU board does the same, and we are on a rotation where the board chairs of each of the boards each take a position, either the chair, vice chair, or clerk. This year, the winner is, well, not the winner, the chair will be the PC chair, or Michael Smith. U46 board chair will become the vice chair, and the Westford board chair will become the clerk. So we need to begin this reorganization with the election of the chair, vice chair, and clerk.
And go ahead.
Can we do one motion for all three? Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
I believe that's
Yeah, we could just do
absolutely fine, since they're already predefined by our
So,
roles.
can we go through the others that are so defined too and make it as one motion?
Well, we should do the first three as one
Probably
motion,
the
because
officers first.
because then the new chair will take control of the meeting and then preside over the remainder of the items.
Gotcha.
So is there a motion for the election of the chair, election of the vice chair, and election of the clerk?
I move that Mike Smith be nominated as the next chair, Jack Ballendorf as the next vice chair, and Mark Drappa is the clerk who has volunteered to take our minutes next year.
Second.
Okay, is there discussion on such a topic?
I don't think there
I don't
needs to
believe
be.
so. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to 0. So congratulations, Michael.
Thank
The
you.
meeting is yours.
All right. Okay, so the next item, as part of the reorganization, is I would need a motion for the remaining items. But if you could, as in your motion, name each of the 7 items, 8 items?
So can we treat it as a consent agenda?
Yes, however, I'd like to still have each item identified as part of the motion. You don't have to go into the specifics of it, I don't believe, but
All right. Are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. I move that we authorize the bonding of required individuals, that we authorize the superintendent to accept grants, that we authorize the payment of warrants upon presentation, that we authorize the board legal counsel has
C. Leopold.
recommended, or, yes.
C. Leopold of Wells and Leopold.
Leopold. Chris Leopold of Wells and Leopold, that we authorize the chair to appoint committee members to committees, and authorize the clerk to sign warrants on the board's behalf, assert the newspaper of record, and which is
Burlington Free
the
Press.
Burlington Free Press, and affirm the meeting calendar for the ensuing school year as presented in the org notes.
I'll second
Is there a
that.
second by Marla? Any questions? Okay, all those in favor, just say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nothing? 7-0. Thank you for Martha. I hope you're not out of breath from that one, because that was a long one. Okay, next up is some updates from our task teams. And let's start with communications with Al.
Communications, we've been doing some work on, let me see, main part of the work was done on the annual work plan. We did have quite a discussion regarding the priorities, and there have been some changes since our last communications meeting. One of those changes has to do with carrying forward the revision of the teacher supervision and evaluation tool and process,
Sal, is this Leaders at Work that you're talking about though? Or-
communications, and leaders at work. There was pretty much a parallel discussion between the two groups.
Okay.
But the revision of the teacher model, the supervision and evaluation, we thought was not going to have to be carried forward, but that was an oversight. The second item, which we might want to clarify, was an item added by Judy, oversight of the district's financial structure, budget fiscal year 16. There were some thoughts there, but maybe we could get some clarification later. Don't think it entails 2 or 3 audits per year, but that was about it. It was a different subject, but it only pertained to U46, so we'll take that one offline.
Scott, anything to add about from Leaders at Work?
Sure. And as the majority of people here were at the Leaders at Work meeting, I'm sure I'll have plenty of critics and support if I miss anything. But if you remember, Leaders at Work is got 2 things going on at the same time, 2 elements going on at the same time. We're developing next year's annual work plan. There's a draft of that in your orgs on page 22. And then at the same time, we're also, while we're developing next year's annual work plan, we are also monitoring this year's work plan. And so what you see, and that process is explained on page 23 in your orgs. Everything's there. It's been nicely color coded. Thank you to whoever did the color coding. But as you can see in those notes, the red items have been completed. The blue items are new items, and those tend to be in the right-hand column, the 2014, 2015 AWP. And you'll see some green items that have carried over. The column in the left, I recognize that as some of the task teams, the leadership, policy committee, negotiations, communications committee. But a lot of that came from this year's work that Judy did with trying to compartmentalize and label the work that she was doing, and it just made sense, I think, to carry that on to the next year. Any other members want to contribute?
Well, we're on an 18-month cycle where there are different activities going on pretty much each different month, and the 2 items that we had in the May-June timeframe were, 1, the CCSU board approves the superintendent annual work plan. The second item had to do with June and July. Superintendent was to create some milestones for key items that are in that plan.
And if you go, I'll add one piece. If you go another page or 2 in, you'll start to recognize that there are intentional connections being made between the annual work plan and the superintendent's evaluation model that we use.
Right.
So the correlation for each of these particular items, and this is going to be covered later when we discuss this, but the correlation for these items will essentially allow us to focus on some number of the standards within the evaluation model to measure the superintendent's performance for the year. So it's not meant to read that this is the only standard that relates to those particular items, but it gives us a very clear definition with the superintendent to understand how we're going to conduct the formative and then summative assessments.
Right.
Which it doesn't seem like much, but this was actually one of the most difficult points to arrive at, because it kind of completes that circle of how we expect work to be imagined, executed and then measured. And that helps us as a board for continuity for evaluating the superintendent, and gives them a very clear picture of what we expect. And from my point of view, I thank you, Judy, for being very helpful with working with us to get to that point.
I've got a question, like, seeing as we're under leaders at work. If I follow the timeline correct, that we would be coming up to our superintendent's annual work plan should be approved as of this meeting. But of course, I don't see it on the agenda, I'm assuming.
It's number 10.
But there's not a motion.
Should have an asterisk.
There's not a motion.
It's not an action item indication.
No action.
Yeah, so can we do that if it's not on the agenda as an action item? Can we still do that?
It's still a draft, so I know I think we have another Leaders at Work meeting scheduled. Can you
I
remember?
don't remember what day though.
Because I did get input from the superintendent's cabinet to further inform it a little. So and there was a correction that needed to happen. How about preliminary, or conceptual adoption of the work plan, knowing that there's some drafts and some improvements to the draft?
Sounds
Yep, and this came up, something like this came up at the superintendent board chair training recently. Changes to the agenda must be the first item on the agenda. They need to be agreed at the beginning of the meeting.
Oh.
So should we discover a typographical error or something to that effect, or have some emergency requirement to make an agenda change, that should occur at the beginning of the meeting.
Yep.
We learned a lot about open meeting laws.
But in a good way. In a very good way.
I was thankful you had 2 board chairs in attendance for our required 8 hours of training with the superintendent.
Mhm. Okay, that was great. I mean, I was on the Leaders at Work for a very short time near the end of it, and the amount of work that went into this process was quite extraordinary. And I'm happy with the way it's going.
Can I put a plug in for Scott?
Yes, you can.
Scott has been excellent, and he has left meetings and come up with ways to simplify and make things understandable.
Mhm.
So the processes that he knows is of great value on that committee.
The checklist is very helpful.
Thank you.
Very
Yeah.
helpful.
It's very, very helpful.
Okay, Brian, can you give us an update on policy?
The policy, the April meeting was postponed for negotiations, so we've only met once since the March meeting of the SU. Our focus was on the wellness policy. At the meeting, we were able to review the VSBA. Since our last meeting has come out with a model policy for the districts. We were able to review that policy in depth. We discussed a committee bias to take a look at VSBA model policies, but felt that we wanted to stay with the broad policy that we built upon the 8 components of the coordinated health and wellness from the CDC, that we felt that broad policy fit our structure a little bit better than the model policy. The model policy from the VSBA kind of wove itself pretty quickly between policy and procedure. And in our case, it seemed like it would just be wiser to have a policy and then have a set of procedures. That's certainly where we've been going for the last couple of years with our policies. So we then turned our attention onto reconciling with the current wellness policy and doing some of that work. Some of that work was to also indicate to the people who will be now working on the procedure work at the administrative level, what part of the current wellness policy we certainly want to see continue into future procedures, things that we don't want to have lost or that we'd like to have particular visibility on. So that was wellness. Student policy review still needs to be completed. We've been working through the J policy. Tonight we have a whole set of policies for second reading. Some of those, all of those went to your local boards. So we would be getting any changes or discussion tonight with those. And still out there, I think it came up again when we were working through at the policy level. You know, there still is a real need technology-wise for our policies, the way that we, on the web, that we retain them and that we deliver them to our constituency. We kind of, you know, we talk about it and then we kind of lose it, and we talk about it, we lose it, but I think U46 spends a lot of time with the policies. Maybe you guys do as well as boards. You know, every now and then, when you need them, you really want to be able to have them, and you'd like to do a contextual search to find every policy that might have a certain term or something like that. And it's amazing how clunky our policy retention is to be able to get your hands around. Like, give me every policy in the district that has this term or this, and sometimes I feel that I just want to throw it back out there. I know we're at budget approval tonight, which means it's probably a great time to just start to plant some seeds for next budget development. Is what can we do as the communications team thinks about website and other things, is as a slow grow method, think about what we might be able to do about the delivery of our policies. We have hundreds and hundreds of policies, and we all know that the minute you have a policy, we really live and die by our adhering to them and our management of them and our communication of them. So
Has there ever been talk, one of the national board conferences I went to many years ago, I had brought something back to Mike and Steve, way back when Steve Sanborn was the PC superintendent. And I went to a session on policies and how cumbersome policies get. And what they recommended was like what we're doing, a policy and then procedures. So to me, if there's a way for us to condense those, I mean, they kept it very brief, very short, and very concise policies, very...
Yeah, I think the issue isn't the policies themselves. It's been being able on the website to find the policy when you need it. You know, we used to have our manuals at home and you could flip through the pages. But, you know, I know a couple of times I've had parent calls and I wanted to go and look at the policy, and if you don't know what section it's in, you know, and sometimes it's not clear if it's in the student section or the faculty section or the communications, whatever. But even then, it's just hard to find what you're looking for. So we need a searchable database
this is
that
like
the
the
policies are contained in.
Oh, sure. I think we can arrive at a more workable solution relatively easily, and this may just have to do with the form that the policies are stored in, right?
Okay.
So I believe the policies are stored as PDFs or, you know, basically not text. So to do a text search, you exclude those from the search. So we already are building the CCSU site off and utilize many Google tools. We can do a specific Google search within the policy directories. It might just be storing the policies as plain text, and so when you search, you get the plain text version. It might be that simple, and it's something we can talk to Vince about, because I really think it's simply locked behind a file format that's not natively searchable in our current setup. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, it's for the policy committee, right? Like, you don't need us to just go do it,
Yeah, I
right?
think
I mean,
it's,
the policy
If it-
committee can oversee it and can make
Right,
it
if there's
work with
cost
Ben,
As
like.
long as it
Right.
doesn't cost money.
yeah, I think it's as long as it doesn't cost money, or maybe we even have that authority.
I mean, it can't be
Yeah,
hundreds of dollars.
well, there's,
Because there's gotta be simple solutions first before
well,
there's
there's
really
the trip,
expensive
there's
ones.
the trip to Google, and then,
Okay, right, yeah, exactly.
A table of contents.
For certain
is good for
members.
a start.
we will
Yeah,
start the
right.
table of
Right,
contents.
well, it's also about putting it on the set of priorities for the folks
Yeah.
that
Policy committee would
manage
have
all of
to
the
do
the
it.
technology
Right.
items. So
Right.
I think just this conversation has kind of unlocked some ideas for me, and we're far enough out now that we're coming into that summer hiatus that we could start to line up some meetings and just invite some of the IT people into our fall meetings and say,
Mhm.
could you brainstorm with us a little bit
Right.
of what technology already exists that we're just not tapping? Because we do sometimes meet up with parents or advocates that may have done a better search than we did in some of the policies, so.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks. And the last team I want to hear from is negotiations, which Judy was going to speak about.
So the board council, negotiations council met and reviewed where we find ourselves to date with a unified contract. And they authorized the small group to continue negotiating with the small group from the association reps. We met again. The association was going back to ask for their authority from their membership to continue to negotiate on the items that are still outstanding. I think there's 3. And we have 2 meetings lined up, June 3rd and I think it's June 11th, to meet in small group to see if we can finalize to have one more board council meeting to find out where we're at with the final negotiated agreement. Support staff is also negotiating now. They've met a couple of times. They too are interested in a unified agreement. So they're working through that now in informal negotiations with small group, and Paul O'Brien from my office and Deb are our negotiators. So we're pretty close on that too. So good strides are being made with getting that work done, and you'll learn more about what that'll look like next time board council meets.
Great. Martha, do you have a question?
What are the possibilities that we'll have a settlement by the end of June?
I asked Chris Leopold that question,
Okay.
and he said we'll be close. I'm not sure we'll be there totally, but we'll be close.
So the board council has been negotiating the salary and benefits items.
The board council gave us authority and direction,
Oh, okay.
and the last small group we had, we stumbled a little bit because we had the authority, but the association didn't.
Got it.
So they needed to go back and receive authority from their organization. So that's where that miss was a
Disconnect.
little bit. So then we scheduled 2 meetings out for that, and we're still at the table. There's still a lot of cooperation
Right.
and good dialogue, really good communication.
So when you say 3 outstanding items, does that include salary and benefits?
Yes.
Or
It's all of the combination
compensation?
pieces,
issues.
all of the language for the most part. I think there's 2 areas left. Workday language is probably the one area that will need more time. So we'll see where we'll reach a place
Okay,
before the end of it.
thank you.
Okay. Not having been in this situation before, is there anything that the individual boards have to do if a contract isn't reached by the end of June?
Not if it isn't reached. Individual
If it
boards
is.
need to ratify it if it is.
Right, but I mean, I didn't know if there was something that kicked in.
No.
No, okay. Any other questions about negotiations? Well, Martha, if you have a chance, or if you have a moment, would you be able to provide a brief update on the legislative issues?
Well, probably I
Actions.
would mostly answer questions. If you've read the last report from Steve Dale, I think you have the pertinent information. The whole school governance issue was on the table until the very last minute, and the Senate version had come to the House, and we could have concurred with further amendment, but in those last days, it takes a rule of suspension to take things off the notice calendar, and the Republicans refused to suspend the rules, and you have to have a 3/4 majority, and so there wasn't the ability to suspend the rules to take it up. So the governance issue died. It did certainly get more discussion than ever before, and so I think it will be ripe for further discussion in the next biennium. A few things did pass. One that I worked on and am excited about is a proposal to spend up to $400,000 to create a common chart of accounts and a set of business rules so that all school districts will start reporting expenditures in the same way.
Excuse me.
And the more expensive part of the proposal was to create a set of software specifications so that if school districts are going out to purchase financial software, instead of having to hire someone to write the specifications before they go to bid, the specifications will be available from the state. And then the other part of that proposal was to hire an educational analyst for the department. And what the department has been working on without the capacity, frankly, to get the job done in a timely manner is creating data sets for similar districts. So districts of similar size, educating similar groups of students in similar geographic areas in order to give data to both school boards and lawmakers and the agency to be able to do comparisons as we do our work. And I think that holds great promise for helping us look at where we're spending our money and to see if other districts have found better ways to do that. I think you've all read where the property tax rates ended up, and trying to think. I guess it would be best if you asked me questions about other areas. As I said, Steve's report was quite comprehensive.
Other questions? Al?
Just a couple of questions. First one has to do with the negotiated differences between the House and the Senate on governance. How far apart were they?
I would say they were at their core very far apart in that,
Right.
well, yes and no. The main difference, let me put it that way, and it was a
Okay.
critical one, is that the House would have given districts up until 2020, I think it's what passed the House, to voluntarily consolidate. And if it hadn't happened, then it was going to be done by the state. So consolidation would, at that point, been definite. The Senate proposal did nothing to mandate consolidation.
Wow.
It provided greater incentives, upfront incentives to do the study, and greater incentives for transitioning to a new governance structure, but there was no stick at all. And I think the other thing that the Senate worked on, which I never completely understood how it would or could work, was consolidated operational units. So their vision was that there would be some units that would do purchasing and those kinds of operational things for larger groups of school districts. But I'm not sure that that was completely fleshed out in
Yeah.
terms of how it would work.
I know we're still at the U46 board pretty concerned about the unfunded mandates coming in from the state, and I know our board is planning to meet with the legislators, and I think all boards should plan an agenda to discuss with the legislators, because we want our issues understood before session starts. But saying that, I'm frankly very concerned about the way Essex High School and other high schools are being, I'm not going to say taken advantage of, but the dual enrollment law is a really good law if you look at it overall, where you offer free education to high school students at colleges and local taxpayers pay for that, and where you have a high school where there's 83% of the students going to college, there is an incentive for a high number of our students to take those college courses. So that is an unfunded mandate. And I don't think, personally, I don't think our district should be held not only financially accountable for a law like this that's coming down to us from the state, where it could cause significant and serious burden on the schools, and making that visible as to the real cost.
So one thing that was, and it doesn't answer your dual enrollment question, and it's a question that a lot of legislators had concerns about, frankly, and the same with the pre-K
Right.
mandate, because it is putting more burden on the property tax.
It is.
But as part of Act 880 or H884, the property tax and miscellaneous tax bill, it does say that any time in the future that the legislature passes a law that has potential to cost school districts or supervisory unions money, that the Joint Fiscal Office has to do an analysis of that cost before the law can be passed. So it's a small step, but it's a
It may
step.
not,
One thing I've thought we should think about is saying, if we're gonna add financial burden through mandates, we should be looking at whether there are mandates and financial burdens that could be taken away. Because I think everyone would probably argue that these are good things,
yes,
but it's the cumulative effect.
exactly.
And it isn't just the state, of course, it's the federal government as well. And a lot of what we complain about are really federal mandates, the biggest one being special education.
Well, I know this particular one will cost us in 2016 $400,000, and will probably cost that much again the following year on top of that. So I don't know where we draw the line here, 400,000 or 4 million, but I can see our community getting seriously hurt by that law if there are no caps. And that's if they could expand this program from 2 courses to 3 courses to 4 courses. So all bets are off as to what it's gonna cost. I think we need to understand the process. And
I think you're wise to meet with your legislators and be looking for some specific things to be taken forward, and you'd be wise, frankly, to submit a resolution to the VSBA, because the VSBA does have a strong voice in the legislature.
very good. Thank you, Martha.
Speaking of that, the resolutions are due. Did I see something come through the state? I was reading
There was a
today.
call for resolutions, but they weren't.
There's a deadline.
It was months out, I thought.
Well, it
October
can't
is
be
when-
too far out because they get acted on at the annual meeting in October, so,
I thought it was around July. I thought they were looking
Could
for
be right.
resolutions by
now you
July.
can bring them up from the floor, but that's harder.
So I haven't looked at the CCSU board calendar, but I was
We
gonna
won't be
ask for
meeting.
that to be a future agenda item if we had resolutions, to have them ready for us to look at as a board, to see if we all agree on what we would want to put through as resolutions.
We could do that as individual boards as well. But if we, if you thought of something, you could communicate it to all the boards so that each of us could support it. You could have a resolution from 3 boards.
Yeah.
So remind me, what's the current status of the school construction funding?
It's still in a moratorium. I actually served on a committee during the session to talk about what we should do in the future. And, there's just no consensus. Some people just want the state to get out of the business altogether, and others of us say, but that's just burdening the property tax more. We tried to get a handle on what's the quantity, dollar amount of potential projects that are out there. In a very rough survey, it's a very large number. The challenge is that, particularly post-Irene, the state has so many capital obligations that even once the school construction backlog is paid off, which either happens this year or next year, it's going to be hard for the institutions committee to even obligate the $7 or to $10 million that have been obligated to school construction in the past because of all the other state building needs.
Is emergency funding still occurring?
Yes, emergency funding still available. I think the renewable energy funding, I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah.
There are certain kinds of funding that are still available, but it's pretty limited at this point.
And in some of the consolidation discussions, was school construction aid discussed?
Didn't get the same level of prominence that it has in the past. I don't think a lot of, given the declining enrollment that we've had for a number of years now, I don't think there's much thought that there's a need for new buildings. What there is a need for is a lot of new roofs, new heating systems, updating of buildings.
Maintenance.
That's what the majority of the projects that are out there are.
I think one of the things I thought of when the governance and the unification of districts was occurring, without funding to do capital projects, one of the things I thought of, and I'll use Essex Junction and Westford as an example, we have the 4 schools. We have ADL, Summit, Hiawatha, and Fleming. So part of the thought process is, in that study that was done a few years ago, was that we would save money if we built one school building and eliminated all the smaller schools. And so I'm assuming that all these little districts, and I'm looking at it, and let's say we unified Westford, the high school, town of Essex, and our population isn't declining. We still need all those classrooms. So we don't have any way that I can look at that we're going to save money by doing a unification right now. That's my personal point of view, unless there's something out there that somebody knows about that I don't.
The dollar figure to construct those buildings is very high.
Yeah, I'm not sure that would save money either. This doesn't necessarily work here, but what some districts are looking at is maybe having very small, K-2 schools in each town, and then using one town to have a 4-6 and another town to have a 7-8, or depending on the size of the buildings and so forth, instead of having 4 K-6s and 2 more K-8s, working out a way to keep a school in every community, but maybe change the grade configuration. Some of the greatest inequities in student opportunity start in the middle school years, where in some areas there's foreign language and there's lots of music opportunity and opportunities like that, and in some communities there's absolutely none of that. So I will say that the whole discussion was incredibly enlightening in terms of the disparities in what is available to kids across the state. And one of the things that really needs to happen is that data needs to be gathered, and the department will begin to work on that. So they got a federal grant to do a longitudinal student data system, and that will give some outcomes data, but they're also going to try to start collecting in a standardized way what is actually being offered to kids.
Well, then anecdotally from that experience, Martha, would you say that Brigham is being realized?
I think there are a lot of us who feel like the taxpayer side of Brigham is realized, i.e. that taxpayers pay the same for the same school spending that they vote,
Mm-hmm.
but student equity, I think, is not being realized. And I think we haven't had a good way to measure it. But I also think the other thing that's very challenging and very frustrating to legislators is we have a system where the state pays the bill, but all the decisions are made in 257 districts or whatever it is. So, you know, when we set the tax rates, we don't have any choice. We have to raise the money that the budgets add up to. But those decisions weren't made by anybody at the state level looking at any data. They were made by each individual school district.
Right, but isn't that just the other side of the unfunded mandates? Right, I mean, right, all the boards get unfunded mandates from the feds and from the state the same way. We didn't choose to do it, so, but yet we have to service them, so it's a two-way street, right? I mean, that's what the state gets back is, we passed the board, this is what it costs us to do those mandates, and other things that we want to do.
I'd say those,
So,
yeah, those mandates are probably not even half the cost of education.
well,
Probably
okay,
not even.
I don't know, right, but I mean, it's the idea of it, right?
I get you. Yeah, no, there's something to be said for that. I think what frustrates lawmakers the most is the decisions to continue to run schools with very small numbers of pupils. And that's where the greatest inefficiency in the system, this is just my opinion, lies.
Well,
You
and that's
know.
where the mandates get to be the most exaggerated. Because that's where your principal is, that's where your nurse is, that's where your librarian is, that's where, you know, because those all, you know, they all have a 0 to 25 or 0 to 75 students, so it's, you have one of those, one of those, one of those. And that, some of those mandates end up being the school quality standards, end up being, you know, you can have 10 kids in a schoolhouse, or you can have 150 kids in a schoolhouse, and there's certain positions that you have.
I think that's right. I think positions like librarians can be shared, though. I think
Yeah.
probably the biggest cost is when you have a $60,000 teacher in front of 6 kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
We brought this up to Linda, was that the state kept the small school grants.
I know.
So if this is the problem, you cut the grants, but you didn't do it.
The House has voted to do away with it 2 years in a row, and the Senate will never agree for whatever
Right, so
reason.
that's a big deal, right?
Linda, when she talked to us, talked about how the Senate has more than once has come after class size. And, you know, that seems a little tough, you know, when we have class size at the high school, and we know that, you know, an AP class of, say, you know, English Lit, and we wanna have a class size of 15, you know, that makes sense. That's the right class size. That's not a schoolhouse of 15, you know, that's an AP class of 15. So there is some of this process that-
Even moving to class sizes of 10, if you do the analysis, of course, you know, practically you probably can't make it happen, would save a ton of money. So there's some very interesting, not very carefully done yet, but ratio data on the Agency of Education website. I've thought that that's a direction we should move in. We should pay based on ratios, but doesn't get any traction.
Well, and I think the last time I heard that was a better part of almost 10 years ago, and the concept then immediately started to come into the weighted ratio, which
Yeah.
and one person's weighted ratio is another person's weighted ratio. But
Exactly.
a number of states have gone to, one student isn't necessarily always one student.
Well, we do that too with our equalized pupils.
Which is a very interesting concept with the equalized pupils, yeah.
But that's basically what it is we weight the pupils and then we do a mathematical calculation that
To
brings
eliminate
it,
the weighting.
that brings it back to the same number of pupils in the state, but they get redistributed
Yeah.
based on the factors that are weighted.
Do you have something to ask, Mark?
Just a quick addition, even if you've looked at the legislative reports, some interesting tidbits came out of the joint training that was held a week or so ago, and it had to do with really a shift in reporting budgets. It's going to be a requirement to list your per equalized spending per pupil, spending per equalized pupil, excuse me.
Education spending.
Education spending per equalized pupil on your articles for budget. So we're used to seeing a number. Now we will see the number and what that comes out to for education spending per equalized pupil. So a one-to-one comparison is going to be more easily done between districts. This small change, I think, is going to bring about a really large.
One-to-one comparison
I-
to a 2-year average to a number that's based upon a 40-day ADM.
Well, be careful though,
No,
right? That's
it's the number that drives the tax.
the tax rate is completely.
So it's
But it's
It-
not an enrollment number, it's not the number of kids
No.
you teach.
No,
Nope.
no,
Okay, just,
yeah.
But it is.
Related number.
But it is a number that every school plays by the same rule set on, right? We are assigned based on particular weighting, whatever, but that's a comparison that can be made, that will be made for the first time next year that we're not accustomed to, and I think that's gonna bring up a lot of questions. And the second set of items had to do with open meeting laws and request for public documentation, which we'll cover at the carousel meeting next month. But there's additional burdens being placed on board members for how we conduct our business lawfully, so worth keeping in mind.
And it doesn't hurt to mention, if I could piggyback on your thinking, the strong recommendation and need for us to use CCSU board member accounts. All of that is public record. Anytime you do any email correspondence, it's public record. So it's best not to have that part of your personal or your business email. It's best to have your CCSU email account separate.
Yep.
So that continues to be something we're struggling with, and it's like going on a diet. It's a behavioral change, and whatever we can do to help change behaviors, Ben is more than willing to
Right.
troubleshoot with you to help make that happen.
Well, I think one of the biggest behavioral changes would occur if we actually do have a public records request, where then people's personal emails will be scrutinized and the board business pulled out. I think that would be an extremely difficult process to endure. And by relegating all of our board business to our CCSU domain that's administered by CCSU employees, it's an automatic process that requires absolutely no input. Right? We have that ability with our IT staff to pull what would be needed for the public records request. So, this is just an example of something you won't recognize its usefulness until it's required, and at that point, it's too late. So, we'll try to get one or two pieces of tutorial and documentation to help make the transition better, but your point is very well taken.
Yeah, I love it.
I know I had to step out for a moment. Did we move into governance conversation yet? Okay, well then, I think this is a good time to move into that right at this moment. To talk about, I guess what's the based on the legislative acts and what's going on, are we interested in, exploring the possibility of, forming a red? Or of any kind of governance change?
Well, I can.
I'm not.
So I think a little bit of background on where we've been might be helpful,
Mhm.
Yes.
because this is not without precedent within CCSU.
Right.
It predates
Right.
me, but I know at least two people here
Right.
were around for the
Yeah.
first round. So could we have some history on where we've been?
Sure.
I'm looking at you, Judy.
Alrighty, so, in 2004 was the second Unified Union Study Committee that was appointed. And it was a 16-member committee, and they met over an 18-month period of time. And, there were 16 articles in statute that you follow to unify. And as they approached each article, they came up with a resolution. And one of the beginning things they did as a committee is they toured all of the schools and really got themselves grounded in what the assets were in each community and what educational opportunities existed. So,
And it would just real far step back, that was just Essex Town adding into CCSU. Is that right?
no,
No.
it was Westford. Westford was advisable. It was Essex Junction and Essex Town and Westford, three
To
communities.
form
No, but
a
Westford's already in CCSU is what I mean,
No,
so.
to form a single school district.
No, I know, what I'm saying is, it didn't involve any other towns, anybody else, it's just
Oh,
Essex Town
yeah.
adding into all the existing towns of CCSU, but to form a unified one
Yes,
district.
I misunderstood your
Yeah, that's all I meant,
Right,
just
just
to-
Essex Town forming with CCSU.
Nothing more.
Nothing more.
Right.
Sounds simple, doesn't it?
Doesn't it sound simple? So I want to editorialize, but it's the depth of that kind of study, like I said, was 18 months. And along the way, I think the committee really unified themselves to see value and merit in the work. And when it came time to present the information, that committee voted unanimously to bring it forward to their communities for a vote. But there was this gap between the work that was done and the understanding of the work and that communication back to the communities. And it was so big that the ability to communicate all of what was determined, I think, lagged, and the communities, I think, struggled to be informed about the possibilities. And one thing the communities wanted to hear about was what are the cost savings going to be.
Right.
And at the time, they
Benefits,
had
what they say.
built in a transitional plan for the costs to go through some of the works, like the unified agreements, and the time that would cost and the labor. And so they built in what that transition plan would look like. So there wasn't an immediate, like within the first 2 or 3 years, savings. They could project savings further out, but I think there was a question around immediacy. And I think at the time, the economic conditions were very different than they are today. And I think the decline in enrollment was just at the beginning place where people across the state were going to start feeling its impact. So as we've lost 20,000 students in the state, that impact now on the tax burden has become real, as well as the sustainability question. And that was missing before. After that vote, I think one of the takeaways for the committee was that there needed to be an incentive, and hence came the bill to form the REDS, which I included in your org notes 153. And it talks about the first year there would be an 8-cent savings, second year 6, 4, 2, to help with that transition period of time to go through the process. There's also been a lot of work done locally around coming together, even in the SU, with unified agreements, our policy work. There's been a lot of unification of our boards internally. So I think that the high school choice bill helped somewhat, and I think the latest burden is the Affordable Care Act and the health system changes. So I just think that there's many new factors now playing into it that should make us stop and pause and ask about sustainable budgets moving forward, where we still can maintain the high quality programs. I think, when Brian asked Martha about Brigham being realized, the greatest fear is that communities will start to cut away at instrumental music lessons and the arts and world languages, when we know we live in a world where it's important to have a second language, and we'll not see those opportunities for students as mandatory, which will further dilute access possibilities for some students who are going to be regionally impacted because they live in a small community with a small school. So when we answer this question, it's really bigger than us. But if everybody could stay open to how it could look differently and begin the conversation from a place of exploring how could we agree to rebuild something that looks differently than we have right now through a more equitable lens and efficient and effective means of delivering educational programming. I don't think if we ever were to design a system, we would have designed a supervisory union. I just don't think that design is efficient or effective in many ways. So, and I speak from a small SU. I mean, I have colleagues that have 58 board members who have nine boards that they manage. And then there's a question of sustaining those positions and those people and the turnover and all the other things that happen that you don't necessarily put dollars and cents to, but there's a direct relationship between student achievement and maintenance and sustainability of leadership. So, and high quality teachers. So I just think as a state, we could model what it could look like, and imagining a new and better system, I think, is incumbent upon certainly leadership and community representatives to explore it. It doesn't hurt to explore it, and to not have that notion or that emotional response of a predetermined yes or no, but rather to become informed about, could some of the laws that have been passed move us forward in that direction, and are there opportunities that lie underneath things that we just haven't dug out yet? It's going to take some courage, but I think the work of Heart and Soul in this community has taught people how to talk together And I think that's an important piece to have the conversation. There's nothing lost in having a conversation about it. And so I know there's interest, great interest, as far as Mark Andrews is concerned, superintendent of Essex Town, and his board chair, who met. We're also at the board training day last Wednesday with Mark and Michael and myself. And, you know, I think there's much low-hanging fruit for us to pick and choose that could be built into the annual work plan, beginning with a legislative dessert together. We haven't done that in a couple of years, and inviting them to one of our carousel board meetings, or beginning to find out that the work a couple miles up the road isn't that terribly different than what we're currently doing, and are there some advantages? So that would be my recommendation, that we look at what's feasible and possible in a new paradigm.
Yes.
Where's our
Yeah,
chair? You're vice chair, huh?
Clerk
Jack's
chairing right
not
now.
So the last time we studied it, it was 10 years ago. And Grant said something at our PC meeting that was like a light bulb to me when Linda was talking to us. My concern is the high school, 9 to 12. Grant made the statement that the high school probably next year will exceed the excess spending threshold.
Right.
And that's going, I would assume that would affect your tuitioning students, the town of Essex students, the
Tax rate.
and the
Tax rate.
junction
It's the
students, the
tax
tax.
rate, so I
Tax
don't think it affects tuition,
Right.
but it
It'll
affects
affect the tax rate. So therefore, when you start looking at it that way, then what will our kids in the junction be faced with if they've got to do some major cuts? I mean, we're all going to, our kids go to that school. So the elementary schools, it sounds like we're below that excess threshold. So I guess one of the reasons I would be interested in studying this is if we were one district, our excess threshold spending would be based, I'm assuming, on pre-K through 12.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's greater ability to educate our kids long-term. I mean, I never like to look at things as my child went to pre-K to 8th grade in this district. I look at all the kids that we gotta send on.
Mm-hmm.
So I like studying things. I think it would be beneficial. I think the PC, we have some space issues, that could be looked at the same time. I think it would be beneficial. I'm not saying I'm in favor of it, but I'm always willing to study it. And I think that comment that Grant made just makes me realize that we're in this boat all together. We're really, and it's different than 10 years ago, because then I don't think we had, the superintendents had the relationship between them that Judy and Mark have now. And I've always felt the first way to start is to meet with all the boards as a conversation. Maybe not just us saying we'd want to study it, but I'd be interested in meeting, a special meeting of all the boards and the 2 superintendents. Because I really don't want to say, okay, let's put effort into studying this if we can't get everybody on board. And if we can't get Town of Essex in, then can we still go back and get Westford to join and we become one district? Can we accomplish it?
Scott?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
I'm struggling with the concept of presenting a solution before we've identified what the problems are. Logically, to me, it doesn't make sense to say, here's a potential solution, but we don't know all of the elements. I'm all of a sudden hearing that there's space concerns in PC, and, you know, there's been talk about looking at 1668, although nothing logical has been put forward to replace that, you know, I'm not sure. We mentioned, you know, will the burden on the taxpayer be significantly different with a new governance model? I don't know. I'd hate to go down the path and reorganize and consolidate, and then all of a sudden in 5 to 6 years say, oh gosh, that was a mistake. Now we gotta go back again. So I'd like to get all of the elements. I'm new to this, 2 years into it. I'd like to get, although not to education and the experience of education, I'd like to get all the elements out on the table. And what are the PC issues, the high school issues, the Westford issues? Where do we see this going? Do some projected
Financial modeling.
financial modeling, and then look at all possible solutions.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, Martha, I think you have one more thing.
Yeah, Martha.
So, a couple of things. One, if we did decide to start the conversation again, I wonder how much of the old study we could take off the shelf and how much we would have to spend. I think frankly, I think until we do some financial modeling, I think it would be very hard to convince the voters of Westford to spend any money on the study, given the results of the last one. One thing that I think about is that, you know, when the last effort failed and there was a real desire to work together for the good of the kids. And then a few years ago, Essex Town did a visioning process of some kind. And one of the issues they identified was the lack of continuity, K to 12. You know, the transition from 8th grade to high school, and you know that there were real concerns about that. And so, for a period of probably 2 years, the board chairs from the town, the village, the high school in Westford met together several times during the year. We identified some common initiatives, but you know, the fact is you can't sustain it. You know, and
That's true.
everybody has good intentions, but without it being one district, it just doesn't get sustained. And so I think that's something we have to think about. The Westford board had a long discussion about this subject today, and Westford's in a very hard place because we were going to lose voice, we were going to lose high school choice, and at that time it was going to cost 10 cents more on the tax rate initially. I don't know if enough can be done to overcome those obstacles for Westford, but Westford is also in a place where our declining enrollment is really hurting on the tax rate side. I mean, our education spending per equalized pupil has been below the statewide average, so we're nowhere near worrying about an excess spending threshold, but we, you know, when you convert it to the tax rate because of the loss of students, it's not pretty in terms of what's happening in year-to-year changes. One thing I would suggest, and this was influential in my thinking, because I went into the conversation in the legislature like thinking, no way, no how, you know, Westford will never support this. I've ended up in a different place, not necessarily a pro place, but at least a place where I think it's worth looking at. And one of the things that influenced me was the testimony at the, and I didn't go to this final hearing, but the House Education Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee held a hearing before 883 came up for a vote on the House floor. And I think you can still go to the Ways and Means Committee website and read a lot of that testimony. And I think it's worthwhile reading it because a lot of it is incredibly thoughtful. It's not all one-sided. When it all comes down to it, though, it's a very hard sell to community members if you can't make a financial case.
Exactly.
Because saying that superintendents will be able to focus more on kids and educational quality instead
Yeah.
of dealing with
Big deal.
multiple board meetings, community just kept saying to me, that's their job. I don't care, that's their
Yeah.
job.
People are gonna say.
That, you know, just doesn't add.
Yeah.
Al? I think you're
Yeah,
up next.
thank you. By the way, prior to 2004, 2000, I was out in our community supporting the unification and got beat up for at least 6, 7 years in that process because of it. And my take on the previous review is a little bit different than Judy's. I saw a very complex issue that the committee really went through all the details. And to Scott's point, did quite a bit of analysis. Granted, they didn't have a lot of the tools that we have today,
Right.
and certainly it could be a much sharper analysis today with better insight than it was at that time. But I came away with a realization at the end that the community was left way behind. There was no one on that committee who was going to stand up before their community and commit to the savings. No one. When you're expecting your voters to support a project, your committee members have got to stand up and take ownership for the savings that are projected. That's a fact. I don't see it being supported without that kind of commitment. The second killer point for me, and I'm the biggest supporter, was when Mike DeWeese sat down in our board meeting and announced to the world that if the voters approved it, there would be a $1 million startup cost. Well, that's a lot of money. At that time, that was a lot of money. Whatever that cost is, there has to be full and complete transparency with the voters. And I think there are some major issues. I mean, you talked to some of them. In Essex Town, we were fortunate enough to have state aid for construction and remodel it, and remodeled the Essex Middle School. But there have been big investments out there for years and years, and we didn't have any help and very high tax rates. And we paid for that. It looks to me like one of the biggest obstacles will be the cost of what's needed, which is the Summit, some of the other schools being consolidated into a more modern facility. So 60, 70 million, whatever it costs, where's that money going to come from unless you have a bigger tax base? And in the area of full disclosure, that's pretty hard to I don't know what the alternative is, but I think that Scott's right, that a financial picture's got to be pulled together. There has to be an educational picture. And the benefits that I see from the merger for kids, I don't see any major benefits. I mean, we've got two excellent school systems in which the principal of the high school sees virtually no difference in the performance, academic performance of the two groups. And both are highly successful. So what are we doing? So it's hard to say, well, we need 60 million to build a new school when we don't have virtually any difference for our largest populations.
So from the Westford perspective, I think I echo Martha's comments, but from a student perspective, one thing that I have noticed that we could do better is really mitigating the issues that come with transition, right?
Yeah.
So we are a K through 8 school district. Our children go to the same building, the same school, see the same teachers for that entire time. And as you ease from a pre-K environment to a primary environment to middle school, the familiarity, the expectations, the ability for a teacher who will receive those students to reach down and understand where they are proficient, where they may need extra help before they walk into that classroom,
Yeah.
sets everybody up for greater success.
Yeah.
That's true. So that's true on an academic level. I think it's very true on an emotional level, behavioral. So where that breaks down, even though we're all in one SU, we're all in, these highly successful school districts, is that once we say goodbye and they head off to EHS, which a majority of our students do and all the other students in Essex do, is we don't have that same easy transition, right? Is even if you come in academically ready, with the majority of the students, we do not have a way to prepare both sides for that transition. And if you're making a primary to middle to high school set of transitions, that's even more impact. So how can we make this better for the students? That to me is one method where with shared systems, shared data tracking, shared curriculums, shared expectations and training with all of those individuals, maybe we can realize a better experience for our students, and the ones that fall between the cracks won't.
Well, one thing that we,
This is, this is a bit of anecdotal and all, but what you experience in a K through 8, I think, is indicative of what natural progression feels like.
well, to Martha's point, that initiatives are not always followed through because people change. This district is now partnering with Essex Town on curriculum development, on courses, so prerequisites. So we're in sync. We don't have all the tracking, but when Rob says, I don't see any, virtually no difference. So we're following the recommended curriculum. So but I think the smaller the school, the more difficult it is for kids.
Right.
And that's a fair.
Scott and Brian?
I'm not sure that consolidation would ensure a smooth transition. I think I work for a school where we receive 4 or 5 schools, and we reach out to those schools, guidance counselors, curriculum. There's other ways, I think, that you can address that transition issue. Al, you mentioned, I'd like to see financials, I'd like to see elements. I'd also like to see our strengths. If we're gonna, we're buying in and adopting this appreciative inquiry model. And I'd like to look at it through that lens. What I'm hearing right now and I respect it, that it's difficult for leadership to retain leadership, more so in other areas than ours. Burden on the taxpayer. I'm hearing about all these problems and all these issues. I'd like to see all of the strengths that we currently enjoy right now too, because if we're gonna weigh costs and benefits, are we gonna jeopardize any of our strengths by pursuing this? So I think before we come to any type of solution, what are the financials, what are our strengths, what are our challenges, and then begin to look at solutions.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I like Scott's mental model of trying to look at what we're trying to solve. I think history, having some history in this process does betray us some. Judy said it, that I don't think anybody in their right mind would necessarily design the system that we have. So there's a lot of us that have been kind of kicking around that, given the first opportunity, we would take the hand that's tied behind our back and, given the chance, we would redesign the system, almost just because we can. But that's not a good enough reason. It needs to have an outcome to it. So, and I think that if you have those clear outcomes, I think it makes communicating to the public much easier. This is what we want to accomplish. We studied it. This is what we feel we can accomplish. Do the reconciliation. I think that I think for me, one of the things that, at least in my mind, I keep playing around with is I am pretending right now that the schools I'm familiar with are going to look dramatically different in 5 to 7 years because our staff are going to be 50 to 60% different just through retirement. Our staff is what, the buildings are just brick and mortar. But our staff, every one of our school buildings have enjoyed longevity that is so different than the rest of the state. We are destination districts. People look to come to these districts. They work their way, you can see it on their resumes. They look to come to these districts, and we have people here. So when we look at our schools and we say, there's no market difference between them, it's because our schoolhouses are good at everything. Because over time we have been able to hire and accumulate the very best to do the very best. And I would think that we're going to be able to do that again. But we're going to have a curve. And at that curve time, I think there's some value in, there's potential value in having some specialties and having opportunities where kids don't necessarily, I don't want the curve to be when my kid's the third grader. I don't want, my kid gets to be the third grader once. I don't want that to be the curve year, the third grade, and so that's when we need to have a whole different system set up, not the system we've counted on for the last couple of decades, but a different system, and that's a system that we almost have to again imagine that we're building new.
Right.
And if we were going to build new, how would we do it?
I support that.
That really changes the the conversation.
Well, we need to do, education can't do that. It's not sustainable in its current model. And we're not putting out the product that we could be putting out.
Well, I like the way the conversation's going, but I think we kind of need to wrap this one up for the evening. However, I think we need to continue this conversation as a group. It sounds like everybody else is kind of in favor of that.
Can I?
Marla, you
I
have
just
one
want
last
to
thing?
use an example. When I say space issues, everybody gets concerned or building. And that's the communication piece. What people hear and what they don't realize is the potential, if you have more districts together, can you utilize a different, like could some of the 8th graders that didn't want to go to ADL, could they go to a school at the town of Essex, or could they go out to Westford? That's what I mean by studying it. I think there's so many things like Brian has talked about and Scott has talked about, is people hear one thing and all of a sudden they see dollar signs and not the pros that could happen. And I do think the territory is different from 10 years ago because of how
Yeah.
administration is working. The other thing is, I think you're going to find that things are changing. The declining enrollment in the state is against us. When we did the superintendent search, there wasn't that many that applied. We had a principal search for Summit. We didn't get that many applicants. Grant at CCSU has said that doing all these budgets, it's a nightmare. People are looking to take him from us. Every year, somebody's after him. I just think that the world has gotten very complex.
Yes, it has.
And I think if we want to keep quality staff, it is the teachers that teach the kids.
Yeah.
So I think we gotta be open to looking at it. Am I in favor of consolidation or unification? I don't know. I can see pros, I can see cons, but until we study it, or the first thing to me is all the boards sitting in a room like this with maybe the neighboring town and getting all this out, or come with some pros and cons and the old study and brush it off so that we have some questions that we can bring forward and look at.
Yeah, so it sounds like most people are, it's maybe a consensus, I don't know, most people on this board are in favor of looking deeper into it. So we shouldn't just put it off we should decide, are we gonna look deeper into it? And what are we gonna do? Is it just we should have the board chair talk to the town board to see if they're interested, if they've talked about it, give them a chance to talk about it, and then see, schedule this joint meeting, is that the next where we should go? I don't think we should talk about it again, just come back and talk about it on this board again. I mean, when would that even be?
Right,
That'd be like next year.
right.
So let's decide if we're gonna look at it or not look at it, and what are the next steps to do?
So would it be helpful, well, I think you outlined several things. Maybe the first most important thing is to say, is there consensus of this board to study? And if there is, would it be helpful to schedule a joint meeting for the purpose of, and I would reach back into some of the membership of the study committee to review that study. I think to do a presentation of some of the articles and pieces of it, and in advance to glean some of the pieces that would be insightful. Like there was some financial modeling, so that at least you knew where they started from at the time, and then have some of the financial modeling updated. Because one of the greatest concerns of all of you has been the fact that you came in with very responsible budgets this year, like 2%, 3% budgets, and you had to sell a double-digit tax increase to your communities. And Linda Waite reported that's not going away next year, and we can anticipate 6 to 8 cents increase
Yeah, I could-
On the base rate.
on the base rate.
Consolidation doesn't fix that, right?
No, but
No.
if we were to form a red and use some of those incentives to ride out some of this period of time,
Okay. The incentive.
so there could be, she mentioned that at the PC
Right.
meeting. And I'm not,
Sure.
I don't wanna sound like I'm selling this, I'm just trying to say, what's the important pieces of information we need to get? Like, what's the most immediate?
Well, I'd like to know where the state is going. Well, what's gonna happen in the legislature next year? I mean, they could change the whole ballgame here.
Right, they could, or it could go
They
just
could.
like it did this year, which
Yeah.
was,
They've been
you get one
talking,
side all excited about these changes, and then
there's also been talk about
Senate comes back to
model
that.
for the smaller areas in the Vermont versus Chittenden County, who has very good school systems today. So I don't know where this is gonna land.
I'd like to
The-
make I'd like to, in an effort, maybe if people feel like this moves us forward, put two things out, is, I'd like to suggest that we authorize the executive committee to have a conversation with the Essex Town School Board to see if they have sort of the same, if they have the same sort of consensus or will of interest at their board level. Let's just see where they are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the toe in the water kind of approach.
And
In
the
the,
scheme.
Essex is what I said.
Didn't hear what Tim said.
And the reason I say that is because in the consolidation efforts, there was some specific effort of Essex Town, and there was some boundaries that were already drawn, and a K-12, independent K-12 was not included in some of the accumulations, at least in one of the boundary drawings at one point in time. So this seems to, let's just have a toe in the water where it is, and then in the meantime, could we build out our board website and get the study on there, get the 156 materials on there, and start
That's
to build
there.
out a section? Because I think that there's a lot of stuff that we could do sort of asynchronously to bring ourselves up. I mean, I'm not gonna do it I'm not doing it for the next month or so, but before a meeting, I'm very willing to invest a couple of hours to read through materials so that I come to a meeting remembering
Informed.
what the study is. And
Just remember what they didn't
And I
do
would
too.
suggest a link to the testimony from the public hearing.
But then we have a nice sort of depository of, okay, this is the last study and this is the material, and we could, whenever we find something valuable, we could send it and say, can we get this up on the board website? We've got like a building of a knowledge site.
So
Those two things I suggest.
to build on that and Scott's point of view, I mean, I think we really have to think of this differently, right? We need to define our current trajectory, ours and Essex Town's, and understand if we could identify desired outcomes, what would a reimagined education system look like for Essex Junction, and Westford, right? I don't think consolidation is the right word here, right?
Reimagine.
It's consolidation to me is taking all these small pieces and gluing them together to find efficiency. We don't have a bunch of broken small pieces we're gluing together, right? We have highly functioning and in some cases very already large and well integrated systems.
Very successful.
How can we close our eyes and come up with a education system that accomplishes more for our students with the pieces we already have? And I don't think there's savings in this conversation. I think it's more return on the investment that this conversation is about.
I agree with
Force
the
it back.
direction Brian wants to go. Mark, you're too far ahead of me. I don't even know if I want to consider a model out into the future. I would like to start with the conversation.
We know.
So I learn by listening to everybody's point of view, restudy the study, and take it a step. We might all meet there and say, we're happy as we are, we don't think governance is gonna happen, we don't think we're gonna be forced into anything. And then take your step. I think your step is the next step after. I think that's the next conversation after all boards meet. And that's something to bring up is all boards, because I think if we model and look at something new with education, we need the educators, the ones we pay, like Judy and Mark, to bring forward if they have agreement of what they see as the future as a model. Because we pay them the bucks to do that kind of work. So, and that would give us some guidance. If I have something from them and I listen to it and like it, or we have our input, I think it'll be a better product. I can't envision what I would want right now till I hear all the past and all the current feelings.
It may just be a simple outcomes statement, right? an outcome could be more or equal opportunity for all K through 12 students in this area. It could be an outcome of 100% graduation rate. It could be anywhere within that, and that's a board direction that then gets implemented by the leaders we hire to do that work, right? I'm not suggesting that we identify what the system is, but simply what are our desired outcomes that we would like to reach? And if a different configuration brings us that ability, that suddenly potentially makes it more attractive, especially when, cost savings may not be the largest component of that transition.
Yeah, I understand where you're going, and I agree with it. I just don't think the timing is right now. I think that conversation is gonna be a 2 or 3 hour conversation. I think we're gonna
I
have a
don't
lot of
disagree.
good ideas, and you're gonna come up with a lot. And I know Tim, from talking with him, he's gonna have a ton. Al's gonna, I think, and Scott, I think that conversation's going to be a very in-depth one with the knowledge that you guys are bringing.
So did Brian make a motion?
No.
Wait a second.
No,
I
would
mean,
it really be a
suggestion.
motion, or would it be just a
I don't think
consensus
we
or
need a
agreement? This is
motion.
really just an agreement that the executive committee would pursue a meeting with the town board.
In all fairness, this has been something that we've had on our to-do list for a little while anyway.
And what would the conversation be specifically about?
What,
Want to consolidate?
I would like to define our current trajectories and see if where they land, where they meet. I mean, what's your analysis today? What's your analysis 5 years from now?
What's your interest?
Let's compare notes.
I think we, running one scenario that you say, oh yeah, we just talked about that, like last Monday, and we universally are absolutely opposed to it, that would set a different trajectory for us. So that would be helpful for us to know. I don't think that that's gonna be the case, but, that's my interest is,
Yeah, let's just find that out.
we're having this conversation. Pretty much any conversation that we're gonna have from this point on needs to be with the Essex, it's that sense of, so we're gonna.
I think all board members too.
Yeah, so it's, my thought is to start, because your conversation of what's the outcomes should not be happening. We should not come up with our outcomes,
Right.
and they come up with their outcomes, that should be.
Essex Town?
Yeah. I mean, it should be, if the idea is we wanna come up with the outcomes of an eventual red, then we should start from day one with everybody that would be eventually involved coming up with those outcomes.
But
I
I
think-
think Scott's not to speak for you, Scott, but I think Scott's in a different place. I think Scott's not convinced that exploring a red is solving a particular problem.
I keep hearing what a great job we do. And
Yeah,
we're great.
that's
I'd really like to be specific in how we do that, where that great job is being done, how we've done that great job, and how we've got to a place. What's been the pattern we've used in the past that's led us to this place? Has it been pressure from 60 and 68? Has it been from pressure that good leadership is hard to retain? Or has it come from us looking at our communities and at our students' needs and moving forward from there?
But
I
but I think a piece of it
Yeah.
too is, I think we have to ask ourselves two things. Does the governance model present barriers to becoming even better?
Yeah.
And I think that the second question is, what are we facing financially, and how would a different governance structure change that?
Mm-hmm. And then it's gotta be understood by
I think-
our voters.
I think that's output from conversation with all board members, because I think once we hold a meeting with all board members, you might have 10 out of 16, how many in Essex? You might have a quorum that say, we don't want to go any further, but at least
don't wanna
we've
go-
sat and,
I think we would have a quorum that would say, we wanna go further if we're looking at exploring ways we can increase the value of our children's experience now. I think everyone would want to, I believe, I'm making an assumption that everyone would agree if the discussion was about how can we improve the experience of our children, and how can we provide some relief for our taxpayers, I think everyone would be willing to go forward with that.
Right.
And I would say, and not just provide relief for our taxpayers, but prevent us from individually decimating our schools
Yes.
because of the tax situation that potentially faces us.
That's excellent. Why would we wanna decimate anything that's
Right.
doing so well right now?
I mean, I don't wanna come at it from a negative perspective,
I don't either.
Can't
but
No, we
it.
can't, that's, I
I,
won't.
it's a piece we can't.
Right.
I mean, I think, you know, not wanting to be negative, but in being somewhat a realist in the sense that I think our future is harder than our past.
Oh, much harder.
So
Agreed.
I think that our financial sustainability, I think the model, the funding model, I think they're all threatened. They're all gonna be
Agreed.
difficult. I think the turnover in staff is going to pose some challenges to the continuity. At least the continuity that we've grown accustomed to. What happens with school choice, all those things, there's so many pressures from the outside. So with that, you know, the governance model, again, I am biased from history. And it just, so I'm going there quickly, and I appreciate you holding me back. So you're giving me good reason to sort of pause, but it is just a natural thing of wanting to look at it. I was there when the 16 people, and those 16 people were really, a lot of them really went into that room originally looking for, I would say a good number of them went in to study it to find out reasons not to do it.
Yeah.
That's not-
You know, not hostile, but suspicious.
Exactly, the right.
Suspicious is.
Yeah, not hostile, but suspicious, and then coming through it and saying, yeah.
That's good, this is good.
Makes sense.
Nobody would stay.
if everything lined up and it felt good and it looked good and it sounded good, I would be for it. I just, with all respect, here's where we wanna go, so let's find a way to get there. That, we put blinders on.
Yep.
And we've got a chance here with the turnover, and as Mark did so much better than I, we've got a chance here to look at everything.
Yeah.
And we need to.
Yeah.
We, you know, linear change is not gonna do it anymore.
So-
We need exponential.
I think this is awesome, right? Because I think that part, especially you and Mark are talking about, is what this board should be doing.
Yes.
Period. Like all this other stuff, like let the three boards do the other little things. We do, you know, I think this SU board, that's the structure of the SU that we could be taking advantage of that we really never have, is that this board could be doing all the long-term visioning and say, where do we want to go? What do we want to look like? There's nothing stopping us from doing that. And I just think it's two conversations, right? There's something kind of very specific, because it's this thing about there's a law, there's an opportunity, there's this thing about unification, there's the thing that was done previously, which is really already there. So I think there's room for both of these things, right? That we don't have to merge them together into one thing, because obviously the thing you guys are talking about is an even bigger conversation that's really big and really, wow, we're really gonna have to spend a lot of time on that. But like, having a quick conversation with the town board, find out where they're at, and then say, yeah, let's spend a little of our time, if they were amenable to it, let's say they are, you know, yeah, let's spend a little of our time looking at this unification thing. Meanwhile, every meeting, we spend half of our meeting doing what you guys are talking about. I think that's awesome.
But we won't.
I fully support that.
We won't.
We can though.
Because we get
Let's do
caught
it.
up in the nitty gritty.
Well, we don't have to.
And when it comes budget time, the taxpayer, I mean, who was it that told us we're gonna be in a similar or in a worse budget predicament? I mean, that's,
Need to wait
Well,
six.
the budget's on the local board, we don't do that much time on this
But-
board, right?
But
Let's do it.
you know, we got leaders at work, and we're working on superintendent evaluation, and leaders at work have the 3 board chairs there now. Why don't we start taking some of that conversation to bring back, to talk to the CCSU board, be studying some of that as a smaller group? We get more done, we get it done quickly, efficiently, and we can bring it back to the total group. Scott, you're so great at it. You're on that task team.
I'd rather have leaders at work do, personally, I'd rather have leaders at work look at the school governance model and unification and this group. But that's, I mean, we're getting way off track.
Right.
I
Yeah.
apologize, Michael,
Move on.
but it needs to be tabled and it obviously will reappear.
Well, it's got some direction.
So
I
what do we wanna
agree,
do in the
I
immediate
do too.
future?
Wait.
Let's gauge the interest of the town school board, and let's start to add some resource materials to
Board
a
site.
segment of the board site.
We might include in those resource materials the Chittenden East work.
This is happening next door.
Yep.
Mhm.
That's right.
There's also a committee that's being formed to help support on a statewide level, some of the red work. I could investigate that to see if there's any state level support.
Sounds great.
Okay, so we have consensus that the executive committee will meet with the Essex Town Board and
Chair.
Mhm.
basically take a lot of what we just talked about here as some of that conversation. Great.
And if you're meeting as a board with that board, that's when you could bring up to them that if we're interested in meeting, that what are their outcomes? What would they like their outcomes to be? And that's the direction that we'd be looking at is,
Yeah, we're just be accommodated.
you know,
As a policy governance board, they're completely based on outcomes. So that's actually something they most likely have.
right,
Mm.
right,
Hand out to you as a business card.
right. So,
All right, we're gonna jump into Judy talking to us about the CCSU leadership reorganization that's going on.
So, again, for the second year, I'm recommending that we not move forward with the associate superintendent's position for a variety of reasons. Most importantly, I think that continuing to streamline administration is important toward, one, any further movement with governance, but also through the lens of cost effectiveness. So I'm working with the superintendent's cabinet, which would be all the executive directors as far as HR, special ed, curriculum, finance, technology, to talk about different pieces of that associate's work and seeing how different tasks can be shared. And also with the educational leadership team. So some of the thinking, and I think Mark alluded to it earlier, is the best value of my presence. And right now I'm sitting on 3 task teams. So 3 task teams, and then board work is every night of the week. So I'm thinking about how to get negotiations in a good place so I don't have to be there. And then communications, tasking that out. And then remaining on leaders at work. So that would be my primary focus. So all of that is underway, as well as some of the changes in the central office, if and when you come up to visit. A new green room, and we have a conference room now, because we divided my former office into 2 spaces where Paul O'Brien and Grant Geisler are located. The most important thing for you to know about all this is that we changed the entrance and exit at our
Yes.
office. So beware and be careful until
Yes.
that behavior becomes
Driveway. You
driveway.
need to say driveway.
So entrance and exit
So
of our
the-
driveway into the office, we switch them. So the entrance is now the exit, and the exit is now the entrance.
So in on the north, out on the south.
You got it.
Mhm.
Okay.
And the signs have been switched.
I walk in.
However, I ignored them completely this morning and did it wrong, so.
So I'll continue to keep you updated, and some of that will become more apparent through the annual work plan, as you see some of the tasks shared as far as the leadership reorganization. There'll be no additional hires.
Questions for you, Judy. I'm assuming the money is still in the budget in
Yes.
case we need an associate or decide we need one?
Yes.
Or if we need money to help with going after people to help you with projects?
Right, so we kept the money in the budget this year, and then that decision will be before you for next year as well. So in your 3rd quarter report, you'll see Grant's update about how that funding is sugared off.
So I think it's worth noting, and I don't know where this came up, but I know it was a conversation between you and I, that the decision around the associate's position is strongly supported by the central office.
Came
there-
through the hiring process, my hiring process. I received a lot of feedback from central office administrators, and I've reached out to the principals as well. And I think that one person in that role has created more clarity as far as tasks are concerned, and for the principals to go directly to HR, for example, or to Grant instead of having to go through the superintendent. I mean, I'm copied on everything, but that more direct connection has created some efficiencies as well in the system. Is that what you were gonna say?
Essentially, yes. I mean, we talk about cultivating leadership, and this is another method of doing so, right? By empowering each of the individuals already in the leadership role to take on more of the responsibilities, to contribute in different task teams. We're just building that expertise. And I don't think any of us would argue that we feel uncomfortable with, Grant taking sole responsibility of the budgeting process, because it's a clear relationship that respects all the authorities around it, but is just so much faster, works so much to our advantage. So if we could achieve that same type of efficiency in several other places, that would free up Judy from some tasks that could be better served by others. I recognize that that's a good goal to have, and I'm happy that it's working out as we heard from you.
Thank you.
Okay. An update on the climate survey?
So I can speak to that if you'd like.
That'd be great.
The results were included in your org notes, as well as the participation rates. In changing our date of the administration from the fall to the spring, I think definitely the high school encountered some competing goods in time related to participation. You'll see some places where we've improved participation, and some places where we're still a little disappointed with it. It is the second year of the administration. When I asked Deb Robbins, who's been organizing this and working with our school climate coordinators, if there was a way we could get comparative data. It's something that this organization is talking about creating. So next year would be the third year of implementation, and the vendor is saying that they could create a report with comparative data over 3 years, some longitudinal perspective, and that would be an additional cost of $800 to $1,000. So it's something just to put on your radar when you're starting to build budget for next year. It'll be next year. You'll include $15,000 again for your third year in a row of administration. I think we're coming in under that. I'd have to double check because we didn't customize it as much as we thought we had anticipated. So we may not even need to increase that amount to get the comparison. And I think that that'll be really important to see over time what the schools are including in their school action plans as far as a means of measuring that work as evidence. The data has come out at a time when there's no in-service time for them to really analyze the results. So they're doing really terse analysis of what they're gleaning from it, and then looking back at what their action plans were last year. So they haven't really even had a year of impact with their action plans that they included from the first administration to see if they actualize that. So some places are going to continue with some of those goals and directions. Some places are going to change some of that. You'll see that in their action plans. I think the area most problematic is at EHS right now with participation rates across all stakeholder groups.
Timing for next year's survey?
Timing is still the spring administration, but this year next year I should say, we'll have a better understanding of the assessment calendar that they're putting together now, knowing where that 75-day window is going to be of the SBAC. When the science kneecap is administered, they're going to put together that assessment window and plan where in the advisory they can have equipment available for students to do the survey.
And then an e-service available to do some intake and.
Yeah, one of the big takeaways the education leadership team talked about were where were the schools that we had great success, and for parents the greatest success came because they had scheduled parent-teacher conferences and they had the equipment available and able to talk with parents about encouraging them to do that, and that's where we saw greater numbers of participation. So that's something that as a team we talked about being very thoughtful about, ensuring that we keep it a window during that spring in-service, that spring parent-teacher conference time, which is of course different in all your schools.
Mark?
So I almost thought the EHS numbers were typos, especially for parents.
That's accurate.
Is this indicative of a loss of confidence in the fidelity of the of the survey, or has anything been identified? I mean, staff and parents are the two numbers that stick out to me,
Mm-hmm,
and students less so, but
mm-hmm.
any further insights?
I think, when the principal reported out to the board, I think the high school is definitely in an overwhelmed situation, and he could rattle off 10 areas that they're focused on right now. And the SBAC field test came with much more a workload that far surpassed any of our expectations. And we're so glad we had a chance to field test it as far as our readiness for implementation next year. So a huge body of work that wasn't anticipated to be that big. And I think that was a major impact with this. The timing of it was different than they had explains, and many changes. So, I mean, the good piece of it is they're now looking at all of the workbooks for administering the SBAC and taking what's relevant and including that and discarding a lot of the other documentation that teachers were needing to be informed about. So it's going to be streamlined, but we were the test place to learn that. I think it developmentally, high school parents are sometimes a little less removed because students become more independent during that, more independent, and more removed. And so that's always a challenge at the high school level of keeping parents connected closely. I think our portal has been helpful in that sense. But I think for surveys, and the other thing I worry about is survey fatigue. I mean, how often are each of you asked to fill out a survey? I think it's happening pretty frequently. And so there's those pieces. I was pleased with CTE, had the highest participation rate. So that's where there's student choice, and it's a 1-year commitment, so parents do stay very connected during those program changes for their students. Particularly pleased with the participation at Westford.
The increase on parents,
Yeah.
I thought was from, 17 to 53 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's some lessons to be learned there, I think.
Yeah. And overall, our results showed across the district a pretty positive outcome, where at the national level they say things like, you have no idea how many systems would just love to have the results you have. We're at high 3s and 4s across the board. That one area, it's not a deficit area, but the area across, again, national trends speak to the social emotional component. And, we live in a pretty fragile world right now, and we can understand why that area could be challenging.
Yes, what were some of I saw that in the social and emotional security area, but I forgot, I did the survey, but what questions was that?
Yeah, there's,
What's the, can you just give the short version of, okay, so what is that really related to? What were people answering that was giving, a little bit lower score in that area?
let's see if I have, are the results?
It wasn't necessarily one question.
Yeah,
but
there's a
it-
series
No,
of
it's a
questions.
bunch of questions, right?
Right.
But it's one.
What topics was it?
The topics would generally be, I feel safe in my classroom, adults in my school help a student who comes to them with a need. A lot of questions that generally indicate the relationships that occur between student to student, student to teacher. So that's generally how they classify the emotional components there.
I mean, it can be things like somebody has said something mean to me. You know, I mean,
Sure,
it's
yeah.
that
Yeah, that's not
broad.
physical. Yeah, right. It's meant to capture those.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
At any rate, I'm very pleased with the results, a little disappointed in participation, and looking forward to seeing what a 3-year trend analysis could further inform the work we need to continue to focus on. I do have to also say thank you to this board for continuing to keep climate as a priority in all of our schools. I think it's really important that we keep that as a focus, and the tool is helpful, and your resourcing of that is important.
Right, so one of the biggest things with surveys is that people take them and they can't see the results, and they can't see what was done with the results.
Yep, so the results are all posted on all the websites
It's
and
been on all the front porch forums.
and all the front
Right.
porch forums,
Yeah, I
and
think that's out there.
yeah, and you'll be seeing in your school action plans what the direct connections will be, and then we'll have all the action plans posted as well.
Right.
So they'll be able to, so if someone said, well, what were some of those results, that can be answered. Yeah.
Mhm.
So I was just a little bit concerned, because I think I saw, you even commented just a minute ago that, well, they haven't had a lot of time to consider yet, so that some of that's gonna happen after.
Yeah, and that'll be improved upon, you
Right.
know, it's to learn from what they are currently doing, what they're gonna continue, and then what additions they might make to something that they saw some progress with or future need for. So those will be in your action plans.
Okay.
It's simply a timing issue.
Yeah,
Right.
Because an action plan, a survey begets an action plan is instituted for the next year, and you're partway through the action plan when you take the survey again. So it's not clear that any changes you may have implemented have come to fruition, so.
Oh, yeah, I got that part.
There's a longitudinal look that
Mhm.
over many years you would want to see movement towards the programs you have
Gets to the
been,
nitty-gritty.
paying attention to.
Yeah.
All right. So next up, in your org notes, you saw that there was a window of opportunity that opened up to submit a waiver for Act 153, 156, which we did. And you know,
that was
Judy might
on
have
the annual work plan too, so. As you saw in the letter from Von Ultimus, we had about a 2.5-week window to submit a waiver. We were prepared for that waiver based on the work we had done with policy and procedure the previous year. And one major improvement to the first submission was the work we've done with the unified agreement, master agreement, teacher agreement. And within our collective bargaining have been able to insert information around the policy and procedure of how that administration of the special education would work. So I think it showed our good faith effort in continuing to move forward with some of the concerns that you experience with having to negotiate some of the difficult pieces like transitions of staff and seniority and assignments, some of those pieces that we were able to agree upon through policy and procedure. So with the association, they agreed to that as well. So we have a plan, and it's inserted in our new agreement, and we have a tentative approval on that, so we're able to include that in the waiver. And I think that made a big difference, so I should hear by June 13th where we are with the waiver outcome. So it's submitted, and hopefully it will be considered, because we are an SU that has really actualized, I believe, the spirit and intent of Act 153 and special education, and it's seldom that we ask for an exception of doing things differently, but I think that we have definitely honored the spirit and intent and just have a different way of realizing the outcome. So hopefully that'll be recognized at AOE level, and we'll be able to proceed on a different path toward the same outcome.
Okay,
I thought it looked very professional, looking at it all in the packet. I don't think I remember seeing the whole packet done like that before.
yeah, it was very
I
nice.
think the past superintendent just spoke about it, and we saw a policy, so I was impressed when I saw the whole package.
Okay, something that we did talk a little bit earlier on during the task team updates is the annual work plan and superintendent evaluation. You have some of the documents in your org notes. You know, one of them is a draft of the annual work plan, basically side by side of the current work plan next to next year's work plan. Also a document which Scott put together about you know, helping you to see the actions and the activities that need to occur you know, throughout the year as you're moving into, you know, 1 year's evaluation and concluding the previous year's evaluation period. And so I guess I just want to first open up any questions that anyone might have that's still lingering about these items. Al?
I'll need to ask the question, Judy. Oversight of, this new item, oversight of the district's financial structure, budget, fiscal 16. What does that mean? What does it entail? What does it cost? And the second item had to do with the item that was carried over, the revision of teacher supervision and evaluation. What is the remaining work there to be done?
So to your first question, the annual work plan is drafted in a way that is connected to the superintendent's evaluation model. And the superintendent's evaluation model includes 5 standards. And standard 5 is resources, and it's all about the management of the district's resources. Everything in this standard. And until we added that, there was nothing in the work plan that I could connect to this standard.
Got it.
So we put it in there so that we can make that connection.
Okay, we're not doing anything different than we have,
Mm,
but it's added to your supervision.
Right, so when you get your quarterly reports, and all the work that's done with budget and whatnot, that is something that can be used as evidence.
I know the previous year, we skipped at the staff request, the update to the teacher supervision and evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
What is the remaining work that's left there?
So, this year, we tried to form a research committee to review different models of supervision and evaluation for teachers. And the teachers, we need the teachers to be on the committee to do that work. The teacher said, point blank, our current model gives us the feedback. We don't see the current model as broken. Can we continue with this model while we have our focus and attention on Common Core and Next Gen Science and new assessment plans and local assessments, and, you know, we feel confident with the current model. when we did a crosswalk between the teacher and leader guidelines, the state created it from a committee last year, we saw that our model is aligned according to those guidelines. So it's not like it's not like we have a huge mess. And there's a lot of places in the state that don't have a formal model. So our teachers felt secure and our leaders felt secure with where we are there, and instead turn their focus to really the principal or leadership evaluation. And a lot of work was done last summer to design a new tool. So we brought that committee's work to the educational leadership team in the late summer, at which time we're ever so close, but again, capacity became an issue. So that got brought forward with hopes that we can simplify a rubric that I think got pretty complicated. And actually, one of the things that with your work as a superintendent's evaluation, I'm presenting this at educational leadership team June 3rd, I think it is. They haven't seen this yet, the leadership team. So is there a way to align the principal's evaluation in a similar way through a standards-based approach so that the annual work plan has a flow all the way through leadership? They have a really good model that they've researched. I think they've looked at 7 or 8 different states and models, and it's fairly close. What really came out of that team that I think is highly beneficial is some changes in the process. Right now, the superintendent evaluates every principal every year, and they were talking about creating like a colleague consultation component like we have for the teachers, where they can work in teams in actualizing their goals. So again, without an associate, that could be another systems change where you have very highly qualified and extremely veteran principals that really can do a great job of really supporting each other's work. I think that that allows me now to really focus in on a brand new principal starting at Summit Street School, and continuing with the less senior principals. So I can keep that focus while the veteran principals can support the work of each other, and that can conserve some of that time. But again, I think you may be seeing, I'm hoping, I'm more than hoping, a model and a process change of the leadership evaluation tool that will come from the ELT, hopefully in September.
Okay, and that's why it says a question mark.
Yeah, that's why the
Principal
question.
evaluation. What that really means is what you just said.
Yeah,
So there is something,
because I haven't
but
talked
we're gonna
to,
see it
right.
in September.
So what
most
happened
likely.
was we designed this, and I haven't had a leadership team
No, I
meeting
get it.
since. So
It's
I just
okay.
need to check in with them, and that's why I said it's kind of there's some revisions that need to happen here
Right, and
to get some input.
And I think that it carries through, that's one thing, I mean, that's what I was gonna ask specifically about this, like the principal's eval, because I didn't see it in the standards. I didn't see, it says leadership, and when I looked down at the standard, it says, go to standard 5, and standard 5 is all about money. It's all the resources stuff. So, when it says you're, I might have missed something, but, you know, that stuff is really important in there about the leadership and the evaluation, but it says on the superintendent evaluation, it says leadership, standard 5, 1 through 8. But when I looked at standard 5, 1 through 8, it all said all resources. I don't think
I think
It's
it's applicable to one.
it's operations.
Well,
Um,
closely it says,
That might be one.
It may have been a
Opera.
cut and paste typo there, but, yeah, a couple of those items
I have to
don't quite
review.
fit.
see, it's, if you look at top bullet 1, 5.1,
Oh, it does have a new one in standard 4.
I think it's standard 4 is where
Is
I
that-
was gonna
Is
connect.
that where it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that like got added.
It's the educational program.
But see, that's instruction, not principal. I felt like that was.
Administers the development and maintenance of an educational program designed to meet the needs of the community.
It's in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so I guess that, for leaders at work, that was my, kind of feedback was, our board is unique in that we have 4 principals.
Mm-hmm.
And we get kind of a rotating meeting because we're holding our meetings in the schools, right? But definitely that was a difference in my experience like from U46 because basically the principals are there. And so we had a lot more direct connection to them, so okay, we can kind of see how that's going. That felt really good. And so I guess that was sort of that leading to my question of how is our board gonna get, what do we get? How do we know how the system thinks our principals are doing? I can explain more if it's unclear what I'm saying.
Let me see if I understand. Judy does the evaluation of the principals.
Correct.
Is that part of what you're getting at?
Y-
Like,
Yeah,
when do we get it back and see it?
yeah, or I don't know. What do we see? I don't wanna do the evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
That's,
Right.
she's doing the evaluation, right? But then, what comes out of it? How do we,
Mm-hmm.
so how do we do our job? And I'm just totally focused on
Mm-hmm.
the job of the board of ensuring the schools are well-run. I mean,
Right.
I think that's really what a lot of that stuff is getting at.
Mm-hmm.
And so having 4 schools and 4 principals that
Mhm.
just kind of focusing down in on the 4 principals as the leaders of the school,
Right.
then that's a pretty good level to like have rolled up. Because then part of the evaluation or the new process, whatever that
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
about, okay, how are they doing in their area, with
Mhm.
their school, managing that thing? How is everything going there?
Yeah, it is
You
a
know,
little
it's
more
kind of-
complex in your situation, and I think Westford, for example, with one principal, reports out sort of directly to
It's
the
so
board
straightforward, yeah.
where,
Right.
the evaluation happened, or, we did our goal setting together, you've heard her speak about those pieces.
Right.
It's different with the 4 principals.
I
Well-
think that's why the school director's reports are asked
Yeah.
for in our org notes. Because if I read them and I have questions, I go to Jen, she's our
Mhm.
person, and I ask for more information to be brought. And then the other piece I noticed was last year at annual meeting, we just insisted on finally meeting at the schools again, at least once a year.
Yep.
And the year
Seems to be
before,
wrong.
we did tours. I couldn't make all the tours, but I think there was value lost this year because I don't believe any of us made any of the tours this year.
No.
And you probably made it. I wasn't able to get off of work enough time. But I think not doing the tours, I lost a lot of value because the principals are one-on-one with us and we're allowed to ask any questions we want during that tour.
Yeah, and I guess and that's a way of getting information is
Mhm.
direct, but
Yeah.
I think this is really specific. This is about this, because this is like the underpinning of the whole system,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, it's like the annual work plan. It's like starting from the superintendent is at the top of the whole entire system.
Right.
Here's this annual work plan, and then it's like slowly
Mhm.
going down the hierarchy.
Right. This part of the annual work plan is about revision of the tool and process for leaders. It's not about what the board sees for evaluation. That's a local board conversation you're having right now. This is solely about the change to the leadership tool and process.
It's within your right as a local
Okay,
board
okay.
to
Local
ensure
board.
that evaluations are being done
Right,
to your satisfaction.
Right,
You know,
Mhm.
please
Yeah, that's, I'm just sort
show
of.
Right.
me, show
Right.
me that these steps have occurred, when did they occur? But that evaluation is, you know, it's, the superintendent is the manager of the principals.
Right, I got
So
it.
that's where we step out, and as long
Right.
as we can ensure the job is being done, and
Mhm.
clearly it's the board's prerogative to renew or choose not to renew the principal's contract.
based on a
Um,
recommendation I would bring
No,
forward.
right, yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of the feedback loop of all of it.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, that I
Right.
was trying to get to, from this, that,
Right.
is there something that's happening with all the boards where that happens every year at a certain time, like there's the timeline, but,
Mhm.
yeah, okay, I got it. This is just about work to revise the tool.
Correct,
Right.
Then there's using the tool.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
happening
yeah,
through whenever it's happening.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So the other thing I was gonna add to this is, the Leaders at Work, task team had asked, after we had created this, to go back and asterisk those items on the 2014-15 plan that are either a federal or a state, statute, or related to EQS or an AOE mandate, so that you would see the connection between the work that is required work at the state and federal level.
That's priority.
Right, so I'm working with a team to do that work now.
That helps you. So,
all right, so, as far as our work tonight, we talked about approving the work plan and the evaluation as a draft this evening and to undergo further revision via Leaders at Work.
Maybe you can just ask for consensus
And,
that
right,
this
and that's what I was
is
gonna say, is that,
Right.
does it make sense really to do it as a consensus?
Right.
So, do we have consensus?
You go around and get a thumbs up from them.
So I guess just, everybody just give me a thumbs up or down. So we're good, okay. Next up,
I think there's 6 of us, that's almost the quorum.
just an
I
update
know,
from
only
the training day. I'll let Mark speak on a couple things.
So joint training is now required for superintendents and board chairs. And this was the first year of full implementation of that requirement. So 8 hours of training, joint training is what the requirement was. So of course that was meant 8 hours at Lake Maury, which was a rather full day, compromising, comprised of several, speakers, workshops. We were covering anything from changes to law, to understanding the financial, calculations required to, fully explain what the tax implications mean to our electorate. Brad Mann was there from the state. We had a great deal of discussion from Steve Dale and Jeff Francis kind of surrounding some of the changes that have been occurring around us, and some of the expectations that didn't necessarily come through in the legislature, but the expectations that I think we're going to face as board members from the people around us. Nicole Mace did a very good job of covering some of the legal aspects and a bit a bit of a revisit on the situational analysis, and why we need to pay attention to some of the statistics that Vermont is revealing to us. And finally, we closed with Rebecca Holcomb speaking to us about some of her more high priorities short time she's been in
Mhm.
office and where she's hoping to go. Truthfully, it was a very enlightening day, as it usually is, mainly for the fact that it's a rare opportunity to get together and speak to other board chairs, other districts, other supervisory unions, and truly understand what some best practices could be for our district and SU. I'm constantly amazed at the to-do list I walk away with from these events, and sometimes they're very small items that just are reiterated. So I think we covered a bit about the request for the Freedom of Information Act and public records requests, and just how a small change in practice on our parts can really empower us to have a streamlined system that won't stumble upon itself in the future. And then recognizing that almost every other district in SU there already did it. So, I think sometimes we forget that housekeeping and rules are a big part of what we're tasked to do for the community around us. I think we have a bit of more information to share at the upcoming
At the
carousel
carousel,
meeting
yep.
around the specifics, but I found it quite invaluable. I look forward to doing these things more and more every time I do it.
Yeah, while I cannot give back to you the information as far as how the calculation really works, I did gain an understanding on how to calculate ed spending, and which was great for me, because I was lacking that piece of information. So I did get something really useful to me immediately out of one of those sessions.
One of the big takeaways for me was just recognizing how much turnover there is in the entire system. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. We always have people exiting and entering boards, but just the quick show of hands in the beginning. Who's done this? Who's new to this?
Yeah, there were a lot.
How many superintendents are new to this? How many new superintendents are out of state and new to Vermont? And the numbers were in the low double digits. And that
Yeah,
kind
there
of
were several new
surprising.
faces too, as well.
Many new faces.
Yeah.
So we're really pulling on a lot of resources to make all of this work, and recognizing that there's strength in our numbers, and any of the problems we discuss here seem to be mirrored by every other person is quite reassuring.
And the other thing that was, well, for me, which is also very interesting, is the difficulties that those boards that only have 3 members have with having a conversation.
Yeah.
An email question back and forth is at a meeting just between the 2 of them, because now they're a quorum. So,
That's right.
But it was good to hear, even at that level, they took some good questions, and they weren't really prepared to delve into what some of the new education-related bills meant, as far as implementation. So it was a great opportunity to ask those questions, and they're gonna follow up with more specific information. Like the questions around the teacher retirement healthcare changes and those pieces. So I appreciated hearing some of that information as well.
So 2 of your 3 board chairs and your superintendent have completed their requirement this year, which I think is commendable.
I'll do 2.
that's right.
Let's make it 3 for 3.
3 for 3.
We didn't see any moose on the drive back. We were warned repeatedly, watch out for moose.
Policies.
All right. We have several policies for second reading. This I'm not sure, do we?
Entertain a motion, I
Yeah,
think,
that's-
and then ask if there's any questions or
Good.
discussion.
So, essentially, I need a motion to approve B20, G8, and a couple other policies for second reading.
Can we list them off?
They just can't find them. Do you think
I've got,
Pages are there
it would have been nice if they'd been listed in
Yeah,
the
Let's see.
J8, J9.
I've got
B20,
B20 in
G8D,
here.
J8, J9.
G8D, is it?
Yes.
Oh, there it is, J.
D.
So the first one's
This is messing
B20,
B20.
second one is G8D, third one is J8, and the last one is J9.
I move we approve those 4 policies at second reading.
Do I have a second? Brian? Any discussion? Hearing-
I'll just interject that I thought that the changes that were made to B20 held up in reading it again a month later. Oftentimes that time to reflect brings something out, and they read well. It's simple and streamlined.
I concur. So, all those in favor of the motion to approve B20, G8D, J8, and policy J9 in second reading, say aye. Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Eight zero. Am I doing it wrong? 3, 4, 5.
Oh, we had 8-0 now.
8-0.
Yep.
I
My
can
bad.
still count to 8.
We had 7
We
to
had 7
0
earlier, and
Yeah, I wasn't here.
I forgot that,
in the beginning.
I did see Tim come in, I just forgot that
Need
that he
number
counts
8.
now. Yes. All right, so next up is, I need a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes warrants, meeting minutes of February 18th and March 24th, and approval of the fiscal year 15 supervisory union budget.
So move.
All second.
Any,
No discussion on consent agenda.
No.
I just want to make sure.
Well,
Well, but you
in,
can ask to pull an item if you wish.
Correct.
in the minutes, if Ben's doing the minutes, I think it's important to the motion that it reads exactly that we approve the warrants and not just, sometimes we don't list it, and I
Right, just
think
the
you
actual
mentioned
items
them
themselves.
audited.
Yep.
Yep, it's important.
So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes 8-0. Okay, future agenda items. What would we like
Got a
to
few.
see later?
An update on the conversation with Essex Town.
Okay,
Waiver results?
What?
Waiver
so
results?
we hope to have the
When's our next meeting, by the way?
June 9th.
That's the
carousel.
That's not.
This is our
CCSU.
last
Oh, okay,
meeting.
as an SU, but what, I mean,
September.
otherwise not
something.
till September or August
Board
as an SU.
calendars and yours,
Right.
September 29th.
Wow.
We'll have plenty of time between now and then to craft the
So I
future
think
agenda.
in light of tonight's discussion, should we try to do a little appreciative inquiry exercise for this board? Not a formal one, but just a conversation about what we think is going right in the SU and in our districts, and maybe a conversation about some of the challenges that we're facing in preparation for, if we do have a conversation with the town, we would perhaps be better prepared.
Yeah.
Is it
I
possible
like
to
that.
provide information how we got here, what's contributed to us doing so well? What's been the source or sources?
Community support.
Huge.
So if we, like, if we
Permanency
can
of
reflect on
leadership.
that and bring all of those pieces, that would help
Mhm.
that process. The product might change, but there's a lot of value in the process.
There's probably a short list that we could.
Generate.
Yeah, generate off the top of our heads.
I don't
Yeah, it
wanna
probably could be something like a Google Doc that we could put, and
Just
we could
populate.
probably start to populate.
People
Just
put
keep
on
adding
it.
to.
That's a good
Yeah,
idea.
but I think that, each of us could probably add a bullet or two, but it is probably a list that we could get to be that kind of real short bullet list.
Mm-hmm.
But there are
Good
things
idea.
like longevity, community support,
Yeah.
Yeah.
investment in assets.
So that's a little different than the outcomes that Mark and Scott were talking about. Like, what would be the outcomes if we did? What outcomes do we want and still want to retain if
Yeah.
we do anything as a group?
I see that as an outcome of.
We want to maintain our
Right, that's,
Strengths
Quality and
and quality.
Okay, okay.
that would be one of the elements.
It all builds on the.
Several, right.
I'm very much aligned towards, let's look where we've been, where we are, and where we'd like to go. Right, history is easily forgotten when things are going well. So perhaps that's exactly what we need to do before we go tinkering with,
Changes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Einstein, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created
Mhm.
it. But I also believe if you've got a successful thing going, the thinking that got you there has some value, and the process that got you there has some value.
Mhm.
Preservation of good outcomes is almost harder than the creation of them in the beginning.
Yeah.
If we're meeting in September, won't we have an indication, legislature wouldn't have met yet and be talking about any bills yet?
No, but I think all of this is predicated on the fact that we sense change is coming.
yeah.
What form it takes is up for debate, but something will come.
Something has to change, we know
So-
it.
Yeah.
Let's define our own
Citizen
future.
legislature.
Mhm.
And by my saying something has to change, meaning state level, the budget and the dollar amounts, I mean, they've gotta come up with something or some solutions. Right, Martha?
Good luck.
Yeah, I think the declining enrollment portion is really what's, if you were to consolidate every single district into one Vermont school district, you'd still have the same average spending, education spending per pupil, unless, and that's the big part of all of this, unless what? Well, the unless means changes which are uncomfortable for at least half of the schools in our state.
Yep.
And therein lies the problem.
All right.
I think a future agenda item that might go along with this is Tim has raised it before, and I agree with, when he has read about other districts or studied them that are the size of, if you take Vermont, the size of the students in Vermont, and you take some of the places that Tim has done research or read up on, it doesn't mean that they're any more efficient or that their budgets are less by being that large. So
Yep.
I think there's value to looking at that, and if someone wants to research it, or Tim has places we can go look at, I think that is of a value.
I could bring some.
One of our,
So some
one of our
comparables.
community members provided quite a bit of information around studies showing that smaller schools, smaller districts actually have a competitive advantage when it comes to cost and governance, and it's all perspective, right?
It's-
So we
There's
can
an
find.
optimum size and there's a too small size.
Yeah,
Right.
we can get some of that information out, but,
Right.
you know, I think you're gonna find a great deal of disparity amongst all of the resources, depending on where they're coming from.
All
I think
right.
it's an important part of it though, before we're faced with having to change anything or being forced into change. I think the more research we have and the more
Sure.
info, I mean,
Yeah, I was a little disappointed when I asked Linda what they had at the state level. She said nothing. So I was like, what, so you're not
Nothing.
researching? But she said, I said, are you guys researching, the, consolidation and other models about who's more consolidated? And she really didn't have any, now maybe she just didn't know, but she really didn't have anything that was like, yeah, we've been presented at the state level with deep, researched models that this is really better and this is the way we should go. It sounds
Yeah, I
like
was
it's just
surprised.
kind of in our minds.
Consider the pace of
Now,
that
maybe-
discussion.
So I
Right.
can't, I don't serve on the education committee and neither does she.
Yeah, so maybe
But
that's not.
there were certainly
Well, they didn't have to have.
legislators who gave us connections to a lot of research. I don't know that the Agency of Education did, but they may have.
I think
Has been
something
presented, I guess, is
official.
more the thing, yeah, it hasn't been presented.
Something official,
If it's
like
there.
being given out as information, as your
It would more likely go to the committee considering the bill. The only
Okay.
way things get presented to the whole body is when the committee reports the bill on the floor, and that's, it might be a sentence or two.
Right.
Okay.
I just wanted to reiterate that in your orgs, encourage you to read the link that's in orgs in the last update, and that's on the multi-tiered system of support. Please be as familiar as you can with that field guide for the June 9th meeting.
Right.
I saved it.
All right, so are there any other,
which night?
any other agenda items?
Or something.
Anybody have any alibis? They wanted to say something, they just didn't get a chance to say it? All right, we're adjourned. Bye.
So we adjourned at 9:23.